Hello and welcome to another episode of Mysteries with a History, where you'll be taken on a wild ride into the unknown and the strange and the mysterious. Like you, I have questions, and like you, I want answers. And with each episode, together, we will peel away the layers to look for the truth. Roswell Daily Record, July 8th, 1947. RAAF captures flying saucer on ranch in Roswell Region. Read the headline, which would go down in history as a monumental moment in time and lead to the most hotly debated and controversial alleged UFO crash mystery ever studied. In this episode, we will look at the historic Roswell case and what breadcrumbs have surfaced over the ensuing 75 years. To help me with today's topic, let me bring in my friend and co-host, Jimmy Church of Fade to Black Radio. Jimmy.
Oh, here we go.
Jimmy.
What happened in Roswell? Refresh my memory.
A lot happened. Shall we just get straight into it? Should I just read the summary?
No. I got to ask you the question. Why Roswell? Why this week? Why now? Why today? What happened?
Roswell is the most famous UFO case on the planet, number one. And I think it's one that I've looked into. It's been covered so many times, but at the same time, it's something that we need to revisit. We need to look into our past, as we do here on this channel all the time. And I thought to myself, why didn't we do Roswell sooner? But I think today's the perfect day to figure out what the heck happened in 1947.
That's a good answer. And I agree with you, Cristina. You need to go back and revisit these historic cases, and certainly Roswell, being at the top of that. We go through so much research and so much information and things, modern events, and of course what we're going through now and all of that. And we sometimes lose sight of the important stuff that actually, got us here and what is behind that. And you do, even you've got to go back and just revisit these historic cases. Roswell, for me, and it's an interesting journey, and I'm going to make this very, very brief. About all the books I did. All of the books that were available, I started collecting them in the 80s and in the 90s. And it got to the point where, and it was Stanton Friedman, and so many others that were just constantly researching this and bringing new witnesses forward and new information. And, went from one crash to two crashes to maybe even three, and two location sites, maybe even three, and from 2 bodies to 8 and so forth. Right. It just kept. And I had so many books, Cristina, that I was starting to get confused. Did I already read this book? Am I reading, or am I rereading old information? And I found myself reading many of these books 10 times. And a bunch of them, most of them I still have. Now, and so here's the situation with this. When Roswell really, in the 1980s was one situation. But when Coast to Coast and Art Bell came on the scene in 92, 93, 94, in that area, this was new to Art. And listening to him interview people about Roswell and listening to Art learn about this for the first time and asking questions, also allowed me to go back and revisit this, as well as other researchers. And that's what Roswell has done. It has entered into the UFO community many times in very big ways. We're not going to talk about this today. Well, we might. But in the 1990s, Bill Richardson of New Mexico, politician, asked for all of the evidence on Roswell. The National Accounting Office, they went and did their investigation into Roswell, and that report was released. The Air Force did another report on theirs. All of this happened in the 90s. And as this was coming out, there were mistakes made in these in these reports that were released, and not to get into in depth, but in one case, the National Accounting Office, they said, and they are the ones, right, with the authority to go and investigate anything, and they were told, everything about Roswell's been destroyed. What? Right? So that's what they were told. There was nothing. There was no phone records, no recordings, no receipts, no paperwork. Everything about Roswell has been destroyed. There's nothing that we can give you. That was them. Then the Air Force comes out a couple of years later with their report, Roswell case closed. Again, elevates this back into the community, and they blamed it on crash test dummies. And crash test dummies didn't happen in 1947. That was 1952, 1953, 1954. So that was a blatant lie and an excuse. So it allowed researchers like yourself to go, what's really going on? We're getting different stories from official government sources. And then later, and then I'm going to turn this over to you and we'll start this. Later, Bill Clinton went on one of the late night talk shows, probably Jimmy Kimmel, maybe David Letterman or something. He goes on and he says, hey, so I become president. And I wanted to know what's up with Roswell. So I got all of the paperwork. And I'm sitting there, wait a minute, didn't the National Accounting Office, didn't they just say that there was nothing, that everything was destroyed? So what's Bill Clinton talking about? Barack Obama goes on the record again, probably on Jimmy Kimmel, and he says, so I got the Roswell stuff, and it was top secret, but it wasn't as interesting as you would think. But he didn't say weather balloons, right? And so you have that, and then of course President Trump comes out and says, yeah, I found out about Roswell, and what I know, I'm not going to tell you. So is it crash test dummies? Is it nuclear microphones to listen for Russian bombs exploding? Was it a weather balloon, or was it something else? And was it a flying saucer that crashed in Roswell? Let's get into it today. We need to revisit this constantly. I'm very curious as to where you want to start.
Well, I want to start off with the summary, but first, Terry, thank you so much for supporting the channel. Brian as well. Michael, thank you. Says congrats on the 25K subscribers. Thank you.
By the way, that was very cool. I saw your post.
Thank you. Has anyone seen what a weather balloon from 1947 looks like? Smokescreen comes to mind. And Bryson, welcome to becoming a YouTube member. So thank you so much, everyone. Just starting out the show strong. So you gave a summary of Roswell and all the bits and pieces, but I would like to give mine. And then from there, that'll kind of set the scene of where to go after that. How does that sound?
All right, let's go.
All right, let me share my screen here as a visual aid so I can read this, because there's a lot to Roswell, and I just want to pull this up. One moment, please. All right, here we go. It's a nice little image there. But the story began in early July of 1947 when a local rancher named Mac Brazel discovered some unusual debris scattered across his property.
Oh, I'm sorry about that, Cristina. That was me. I was getting stage 2. I was going to, okay, continue.
Okay. Here's a really interesting and a really important piece about this case. The day of this alleged crash, there was a significant thunderstorm. Now, it's believed by some UFO researchers that this craft was struck down by lightning. And then the pieces, after it crashed into the ground, pieces flew everywhere that you could imagine, not just in Mac Brazel's ranch, but so much farther than that. So he reported the strange findings to local authorities, who subsequently contacted the nearby Roswell Army airfield. And in response, a military team was dispatched to the site to investigate what was going on. They took Mac very seriously, and for several days, this team was collecting all of the debris that they could find. Initially, the military officials stated that they had recovered a flying saucer from the site. That was the very first thing that they said, and the newspaper snatched right up on that, as we can see right here on the screen. However, this announcement was later redacted, and the military claimed that the debris was actually from a crashed weather balloon. The incident quickly faded away from public attention and became just another footnote in military history. Now, one of the most prominent figures in the Roswell story was Jesse Marcel. He was an intelligence officer with the Roswell Army Airfield and was one of the first military personnel to arrive at the scene of the alleged crash. According to Marcel, the debris he saw at the site was unlike anything he had seen before, and he believed that it was of extraterrestrial origin. He did take one of those little pieces of debris, put it in his pocket, and took it home for his family to see. Another key figure in the Roswell story was a man named Glenn Dennis. Dennis was a mortician who worked in the nearby town of Roswell, and he claimed to have received a mysterious phone call from someone at the Roswell Army Airfield asking how to preserve bodies that had been exposed to the elements. Dennis also claimed to have seen strange debris and unusual military activity around the time of the incident. But it wasn't until the late 1970s, early 1980s, that the story of the Roswell incident was revived and began to gain widespread attention, thanks to Stanton Friedman. And he began to investigate the incident, interview witnesses who had claimed to have been involved. And then, Jimmy, in the 1990s, that was when the public was supposedly getting answers from the military, claiming that what happened in 1947 was the secret project, Project Mogul, and then that changed to Operation High Dive. And you touched on that, and we're going to get even deeper into those two secret projects. But we brought up several very important people: Mac Brazel, Jesse Marcel, and Glenn Dennis. Out of those three people, who do you want to cover first?
None of them.
Oh, okay.
Here's no, we're going to cover all of them, but if now let's back up and make a couple of very important points. I want to talk about Walter Haut first, and who is Walter Haut? Well, Walter Haut, Roswell Army Airfield at that time was the only air base on planet Earth that had nuclear weapons. It was the most top secret controlled place on planet Earth, period. Okay? Now, the very best and the very brightest in the United States military, those with the most secret clearances, were stationed at Roswell Army Airfield. And that cannot be stressed enough. Okay, so right there, when we come to a situation where information, everything is secret, the entire city of Roswell, everybody that was employed at the base and everything else, we just came off of World War II. We were now in the atomic age, and everything was secret. Nobody talked, period. So information coming off of that base was tightly controlled. So we come to this incident that happened somewhere between July 2nd, July 3rd, July 4th, and of course the release of the newspaper headlines, which were on July 8th. Walter Haut prepared the press release to come out of Roswell Army Airfield to the public. And that press release, which eventually wound up on the front page of the Roswell Daily Record, that press release was absolutely scrutinized line by line. You are not going to release something like that out of that secret atmosphere that they were in at Roswell Army Airfield without it being perfect. So you are not going to do a press release about aliens and flying saucers unless it was true and unless it was time to talk about this. Period. That's it. You're not going to come up with military disinformation about flying saucers and ET in the nuclear age, in that aura of secrecy that was completely surrounding the city of Roswell and Roswell Army Airfield. It's one of the most important points in the entire case of Roswell that I can make. We can talk about alien bodies, Cristina. We can talk about witnesses. We can talk about caskets. We can talk about Glenn Dennis. We can even talk about Jesse Marcel. We can talk about Mac Brazel. We can talk about the Foster Ranch. We can talk about all of that stuff. But the foundation of everything is that initial press release that was written and approved by all of the commanders and everybody else over at Roswell Army Airfield, the military at that time in the chain of command. You did what you were told. It was a very secret atmosphere. So that's the press release that was written. It was approved and signed off and then went out to the press and picked up by the Roswell Daily Record. That press release, which I just put up the front page, RAAF, Roswell Army Airfield, retrieves flying disc at Ranch. And there were no details given about the flying saucer and what it was and the size or anything like that. But they said it had been retrieved and it was on its way. I believe, I don't have the full article in front of me. There it is, to Wright-Patterson. And it was going to go to Houston first and then up to was being loaded on the planes to be investigated. That's the foundation of everything. Now, that's why Walter Haut, in my opinion, is one of the most important people to address first. Second is Jesse Marcel. And the reason why Jesse Marcel is such a key figure here is he was an agent, right? This guy was an intelligence officer. That's what he did. And not only at Roswell, that was 1947, but in 1946, how important was Lieutenant Colonel Jesse Marcel? He helped administer Operations Crossroads, the 1946 atom bomb test at Bikini Atoll, one of the most important moments in human history when it comes to the nuclear age. And he was the guy that helped administer that event. So somebody like that, who a year later now finds himself at Roswell Army Airfield because it was the only location of nuclear weapons on planet Earth, that's who Lieutenant Colonel Jesse Marcel was. Now, if he's going to go out to a crash site and investigate and see what is going on, and he determines that it was a flying saucer, I'm pretty sure he knows what he's looking at. And I'm pretty sure he wasn't looking at a weather balloon, and he would know the difference. If it was a weather balloon, it would have been in Walter Haut's press release. It would have been that from the very, very beginning. So that's who Jesse Marcel was. In the cover-up that happened, and we've got so much to cover here. In the cover-up that happened, after that press release went out, and this went out across the wire, and we've heard the radio, the Army Air Force recovers flying disc at ranch in Roswell, New Mexico. Breaking news. We've all heard those radio recordings, and it was huge news. Every journalist, every investigative reporter in the United States, at every newspaper, at every television station was driving and flying and taking a train to Roswell, New Mexico. All right. We were that close to this story busting out huge. The Army realized and the military realized they made a mistake. And they turn around very quickly and said it was a weather balloon and debunked the entire thing the next day in the newspaper. So all of those reporters that were converging on Roswell turned around and went home. The story died. It completely died on the vine. Not until 1979 with Stanton Friedman, who had heard that there was a military eyewitness to a crashed UFO in New Mexico that was willing to talk about it. Stanton Friedman hears about this, finds and contacts Jesse Marcel, and does the interview in 1979. Between 1947 and 1979, the case was squashed. Nobody knew about it. I have brought up this point many times. You can go yourself and search any books. You can listen to any interviews. You can watch any movie, any documentary between 1947 and 1979, and there's not one mention of Roswell. It doesn't exist. That's how big the cover-up was. Nobody went back and addressed it. That newspaper headline, which grabbed the country and grabbed everybody's attention, and it was sensational, everybody forgot about it. It was completely squashed. I have studied radio shows and TV shows and movies and documentaries from the last 70 years. There isn't a mention of Roswell. It just simply doesn't exist. Kenneth Arnold, 1947, a month before Roswell, has his famous sighting in Washington, right? Kenneth Arnold did interviews for the next 10 years everywhere. He was everywhere, and he should have been. He never mentioned Roswell. Never did it. On the Long John Nebel Show, the biggest radio program in the United States with 40 million listeners a night, 6 nights a week, covering the UFO news, never once mentioned Roswell with all of the guests that were on that show. That's how big the cover-up was. So it's Walter Haut for me. It's Jesse Marcel. It's 1947 to 1979 and the cover-up. And that's the most important evidence that we have about Roswell.
And I have so many questions for you. Mr. Webb, thank you so much. Sever, thank you so much as well for supporting the channel. And one of my questions for you, Jimmy, is what can you tell us about the General Ramey memo?
Okay. Now you're talking about the memo that is in the photograph, right? Okay. So when they flew to Houston and they did the press conference and Jesse Marcel did the famous shot of him holding up the weather balloon debris, and you could see the look on his face was, I don't want to be here. I don't want to use bad language on your show. I've been doing that lately. I won't do it today. I want to. But you could tell the frustration on his face. But in the background, General Ramey is holding a memo, a piece of paper. And in the high-res images that have been preserved over the years, there have been many analysts that have gone back, blown up that memo, and started taking notes from it. There it is right there. All right. Now, I've read different versions of this over the years, but it basically says the flying saucer and its wreckage and its occupants are on their way to Wright-Patterson. Now, we don't know who wrote the memo, who it was written to. Was it written to the president at that time? Was it a memo out of Washington back to Ramey? Don't know. But what it says in that memo is aliens, bodies, craft, debris, flying saucer, and en route to Wright-Patterson.
All of the trigger words.
Yeah, it doesn't say anything about, and it's there. You can read it too. It's pretty clear. No mention about a weather balloon.
And when we're looking at this case, my next question for you is, we're aware that it resurfaced due to Stanton Friedman in 1978, 1979. How do you think the story was quiet for so long? I mean, we saw that newspaper that said flying saucer, using really big keywords, and then it died down until the 1970s. In your opinion, from the research that you've done, how do you think that was possible? Because it's
the Air Force, quite simply, and the Department of Defense and Washington knew that they had a flying saucer. So in reference to anything, and that goes to Project Blue Book, there's no Roswell in Project Blue Book, right? You would think that it would be in there, but it wasn't. They did not want to discuss this case ever again. They did not want this to go into the public. When the 1952 UFO flap happened in Washington, D.C., there were sightings all across the country. It was in the newspapers every single day. There was a general hysteria going on around the country at that time. And to express it now, I don't think we really have a true feel of what was going on. There were sightings everywhere. And then suddenly we had them over the nation's capital. So much so that the Air Force had to do that famous, now infamous press conference in Washington, D.C., trying to debunk and calm down the country because there was a hysteria going on. Right after that, a government-sanctioned UFO documentary came out. It's called UFO. Which anybody can go and see. And I stress that you do. In that, which they had real, I'm doing air quotes, film footage of different sightings. One over Montana, I believe. Another one over Utah. Incredible pieces of footage. And this was, they had the press conferences in there. They covered every big case up to that point. The film came out in 1955, I believe, 56. Every famous case up to that point. No Roswell, right? No Roswell. And the Air Force, who was part of that, they did a reenactment of the 1952. They had the complete transcription of the conversations that were going in the radar rooms as these objects were being tracked in 1952. They had the support of the United States Air Force in that film. Not a mention of Roswell. They didn't want it discussed. They did not want focus going back on it. If it wasn't for Jesse Marcel in 1979, the cover-up probably would have continued.
Let's talk about Mac Brazel. He was the guy that saw the debris on his ranch. He came out to the public. He went on radio stating that I saw something really strange. And then pretty shortly afterward, he changed his story and stating it was nothing out of the ordinary. Let's talk about that. And I'm going to share my screen here of an image of Mac Brazel, at least one's of the very few that we have.
Let's talk about Mac Brazel for a second. He was a ranch hand at the Foster Ranch. He was a cowboy, okay? He was a sheep herder, right? He was a cowboy. And he was broke. He was a cowboy. He had no money, didn't have anything. He was a cowboy, lived at a ranch. It's way north of Roswell, by the way. It's not in Roswell.
No.
It's an hour and a half drive outside of Roswell, north and east. But anyway, just a cowboy, broke cowboy, had nothing. Probably had one pair of pants, one pair of cowboy boots, one cowboy hat. And I'm not making fun of the situation. But when he came to town, he was detained. He spoke. He went to the sheriff. Air Force gets a hold of him. He disappears for about a week. They put him on lockdown. The next time he was seen in town, he had a brand new Ford pickup truck, right? And had changed his story. Now, I'm not saying, or I'm not accusing, or, but I'm just saying he's got a brand new pickup truck when he had nothing before that. He's driving around in his brand new pickup truck going, weather balloon. There's nothing. It was a weather balloon. Here's a fact of the case that isn't spoken about a lot. So I'm here to piss people off. All right. So let me make everybody a little bit angry. The whole weather balloon idea behind this and some of the images that have been posted by the Air Force about Mogul, that it was one big silver balloon, right, with this, all this devices hanging down, this detection equipment below it, and that they launched this and they launched this one. Okay, Project Mogul only lasted from mid-1947 to 1949. That's it. 2-year project. It was very expensive, by the way. The first versions of Project Mogul, it wasn't a balloon. It was balloons, plural. It was a plethora, a bunch of black rubber balloons held together in a bunch, right? And that was Project Mogul in 1947. That's not what crashed at Mac Brazel's ranch. Not what was shown in Houston was not what Project Mogul was in 1947. It was hundreds of small balloons that were put together. It wasn't until 1948 when technology got a little bit better and they developed materials that leaked less because the helium that was used, helium's a very small particle. So with the rubber balloons, it would escape, right? So they wouldn't float long enough to do anything. But that was the original Project Mogul. And that's not what was around in 1947, July 1947, for the Roswell UFO crash. The Air Force doesn't want to talk about that. They don't want to bring that up. The high altitude, long lasting balloons were 1948 and 1949, not in 1947. It's a very important point, and it's part of the cover up.
And along with that, with the Project Mogul, it's generally accepted that there were also microphones attached as well to measure and hear if there were any nuclear testing in the Soviet Union, along with certain pieces of string. I mean, there were conventional pieces of technology that someone would be able to recognize and realize, okay, this is a part of some kind of balloon. But when Jesse Marcel went to the area to look at the debris, he didn't see that. He didn't see any microphones. He didn't see any modern tech of that time, right? What he saw was weird metallic material that he thought was so astonishing that once again he placed it in his pocket and took it home to show his family. He was very knowledgeable when it came to weather balloons, at least from Jesse Marcel Jr. son had mentioned in his book The Roswell Legacy that his father senior, right, knew about weather balloons. He was knowledgeable in these things, and he wouldn't take a piece of debris home to show his family and being like, look what I found, a weather balloon. That wasn't the case, at least from these stories that have been passed down. But what you had mentioned is really important because you're right. A lot of people don't talk about that when it comes to Project Mogul, that some of the original ones, it was multiple balloons. It wasn't just one, but the debris that was photographed, it was just one balloon.
Yeah. Now, and here's the situation with that. And I have to just stress with this. Jesse Marcel, Walter Haut, and everybody else at Roswell Army Airfield were not idiots. This was the best of the best of the best at the most secret, top secret location on planet Earth. That's it, man. That's the end of the story right there. And Jesse Marcel, who was the administrator for the Bikini Atoll atomic bomb test in 1946, if he's going to stroll out onto a debris field, he knows what he's looking at. Now, there was a couple of points there. He knew it wasn't a weather balloon or anything else. And so he was out there with a partner. He says, man, stay here. I'm driving back. Remember, this is 80 miles outside of Roswell. He's got to jump in his Jeep or his car, whatever they drove out there with. He drove back to the base. Dudes, get some trucks, get some men together. We've got to go cordon off this area. We've got to crash, and let's go. And so that took hours. That was the first day. They come back, they cordon off the area, and they start collecting everything. One of the comments that I found interesting from Jesse Marcel, he said that they didn't see any wires, right?
That's right.
There wasn't any electronic stuff. Now, if this was a Project Mogul balloon, I'm just calling it as I see it. The Project Mogul balloon was its primary purpose was recording sound waves. So you've got recording equipment of some kind, a reel-to-reel tape recorder running with batteries, wires, microphones, cables, all of that stuff would have been there. They didn't find any, there was no comments or anything. And Jesse would have seen some tape, right? Recording tape. Something would have been out there to tip it. Oh, this is us. This is a secret project from the United States. No, that's not what they saw. And this is the second point with this, which I think is most important. This was a debris field. There was a gouge in the ground that was 300 to 500 feet long. So what Jesse saw and what Mac Brazel didn't know, what he saw was something hit the ground, broke apart, and then went up the hill and then continued. So whatever crashed there, or, hit the ground, was now somewhere else. And that's what ended up happening is they went out and they found the actual craft itself that flew past Corona, and the other eyewitnesses of another area, which was Aztec, which came out a little bit later. That was covered in a book in 1950, by the way, the Aztec crash, which is another aspect of this, and we'll circle back to that. But that's what they collected originally, was the debris from the original impact. And this thing skidded across the ground, gouged into the ground. It was large, and then continued. And it was probably on a trajectory. It wasn't that it was flying. It was just an object that crashed, bounced off the ground, and then landed. I believe it was about 100 miles away in Corona, west of Corona. So all of this. Again, Jesse's accounting of this in 1979 and how these witnesses that started to come forward finally talking about this was the size and the scope of the cover-up was starting to be revealed. And there was a huge paper trail. There was a lot of witnesses. And when you take everything in total, just the events of the very first day, it's a cover-up. You have Walter Haut and his press release. You have Roswell Army Airfield and the secrets that they needed to absolutely have the best staff and military people in the world there. They are not going to make mistakes. And I believe everything that happened on the first day was how it went down.
And with Project Mogul, we didn't get that information that it was Project Mogul until 1994.
That's right.
During this time when these pictures were taken and published back in 1947, they were just stating, no, it's just a weather balloon. That's it. There's nothing else there. But we had to wait so many years later, so many decades later to say, let's continue adding to this story. And that's kind of where my question is. If it had come and died in 1947, and then it was resurrected once again in the 1970s, 1980s. Why would they even bother stating, no, it was Project Mogul? And then later it turned into Operation High Dive in the same year. So you had Project Mogul coming out in 1994. That information became public, and then Operation High Dive also. That information became public in the early 1990s as well. My question is, at this point, why bother? Why even give people a supposed explanation?
Well, okay. And yes. Well, the answer is they were trying to figure out a methodology back in 1947 on the art of the cover-up. The way things were dealt with after that point with the United States Air Force and the Department of Defense nearly followed what happened at Roswell to the letter. They had the playbook done, right? They figured out how to do this. But if we back this all up, why would the Air Force, by their own admission, load a weather balloon on a military transport plane, a weather balloon, which would fit in a suitcase, but they put it on fit in a box, right? But they loaded it up on a military transport plane and flew it to Wright-Patterson when they knew it was theirs. If their story is true, right? Why would they do that? Why would that ever leave New Mexico? I am sure, Cristina, I'm pretty sure these balloons crashed all the time, right? And there's nobody walking around their fields in New Mexico or Arizona or Colorado or Oklahoma going flying saucer. No, it's a balloon. It's a balloon. It's a weather balloon. You're going to look at it and see what it is. But for some reason, in this case, they felt the need to put this balloon on a military transport and fly it to Wright-Patterson so they could figure out what they already had. Nah, it just doesn't make any sense. So yeah, it was a cover-up. They had to figure out how to cover it up, and that was the playbook. That was the method of operation. That's what they did for the next until today, 80 years later.
That's right. Ken, it's going to be his birthday on Sunday, so happy almost birthday, Ken.
I have one Ken Priest blueberry biscuit left in my freezer. I will defrost it and pop a candle in it, and I'll live stream that sucker for you, Ken. Happy birthday.
Happy almost birthday. So the next person that I would like to talk about is Glenn Dennis, the mortician.
Let's talk about Glenn. Yeah.
This is a really bizarre story. Let me go ahead and give the summary while I pull up the image. And also a little bit later, we're going to talk about some of the breadcrumbs, hints, and things that have come to the surface in recent years as well for those that are listening to this live. So
Glenn Dennis, mortician in Roswell. And what had happened was 40 years later, he hears something about this, and then he calls in and says, "Hey, I was a mortician, and I got a phone call." Now he didn't come forward for 40 years, but then again, nobody did. Okay, so he wasn't the only one, and the amount of secrecy. I keep going back to that point, but there was nobody in the city of Roswell that was leaking information. No, man. No. This was, everybody respected what was going on there. So nobody was talking. And Glenn Dennis was one of them. But he says, he gets a phone call, July 4th, 5th, 6th, whatever, and says, "Hey, we need some small caskets for children." What? Yeah, we need them delivered. I think the number was 5. We need them delivered to Roswell Army Airfield. And by the way, they need to be hermetically sealed, hopefully aluminum. Right? And he's like, "Dude, we don't stock those in Roswell." But he somehow gets these children's caskets together. He delivers them. He drives out, and he goes to the back entrance of the hospital. He goes into the hospital, and there was a nurse. He sees the commotion, and he's got his paperwork. He's got his delivery, truck out front, and he's supposed to be there. But nobody's paying attention to him. But he's watching the commotion going on in the hospital. And there was a nurse there. And also there was a redheaded sergeant, too, as well, that comes up with a lot of these witnesses that have come forward. Anyway. So this nurse, he knows, and he goes up to the nurse and says, "Hey, man, what's cracking? What's going on?" And she tells him that she saw an autopsy of an alien body, and she tells him this. And so now suddenly he's been told this, and now he knew her name. This is the only little chink in the armor of Glenn Dennis, because Glenn went on the Roswell Museum that is there. He started that museum. I think Walter Haut, the press officer that I mentioned earlier, I think they were like partners in that, and they started the Roswell Museum there on Main Street. Anyway, so Glenn Dennis gives the name of this nurse. And allegedly, he went back to try to find her later, and they told her she was transferred to like Europe, and she was gone. So she disappeared, but he had her name. And investigators over the years took the name that Glenn Dennis had given them and couldn't find her. The name didn't match. And that was something that people wanted to, put a little doubt into Glenn Dennis's story. My take on that is it was 40 years ago, and remembering a name of an acquaintance like that and getting it correct or incorrect, I can't blame him for bad memory. if that was the case. He did come up with another name, and that also the trail went cold. So the story about this nurse and Glenn Dennis in his interviews originally about this, that story kind of fell apart. Not to say that she didn't really exist, but the name. And I remember, Cristina, this is no joke. I remember reading her name and the original interviews. And so I was like, man, holy crap, man, we got the nurse's name. Okay, so maybe she's going to surface. And as time went by, it was about a year. As time went by, that part of the story ended up coming apart. We never did get. There's been some suspicions of who the redheaded sergeant was that was running around at the hospital barking orders, and that never really got solid as well.
And no, it's a really odd and unique story, and I didn't know the tidbit that Glenn Dennis had created the Roswell Museum in 1991. I just put a poll up in the live chat, so please answer that. And it's saying, Roswell mystery. Was it A, an alien spaceship, B, test of German secret aircraft, C, test of top secret USAAF aircraft, or D, balloon/crash test dummies? So answer that poll, and we're going to get to that a little bit later on what the results are, on what you think
it's going
really
to be
happened.
100% alien spacecraft. And if anybody votes outside of that, I want their name. I will
Their name and number.
I will publicly shame you. See,
I hope not.
but you know, it's such a strange situation. Let's and we've got so much to cover. I want to talk about Annie Jacobsen though, because Annie Jacobsen, who I just talked to her last week, and I man, she is just one of the best journalists and investigative reporters and authors out there. Her books are amazing. I have all of them. She's been a guest on Fade to Black many times. And I like her work and her book. I couldn't wait to get this book, Area 51, An Uncensored History of America's Top Secret Military Base. Right? I want that book. It's Annie Jacobsen. So I get the book. And I brought Annie. Don't get angry. Well, it's on the air. I think we did this on the air, so maybe it's part of the public record. But I came to that part, and she didn't want to discuss it. And that was at the end of the book. And I remember reading her claim that there she is there. She's amazing. She lives here in Southern California. And man, she's just amazing. I love Annie Jacobsen. But she claimed at the end of the book that Joseph Mengele, the Joseph Mengele, the mad doctor of Auschwitz, right? We're killing the girl tonight. You know, that dude, right?
The
Joseph
angel
Mengele,
of death. Yes.
Yeah, the angel of death. Escapes Nazi Germany, gets recruited, drafted by none other than Joseph Stalin. And that Stalin gets him to create these monsters, these small child-sized, freakish humanoid bodies. Now, and I was never really clear on if these were living, right? Okay, but the idea of this. So she puts this in the book, and that they put these Mengele created creations on a craft and flew them over the United States with the intentions of them crashing and freaking out the United States citizens, and would hopefully have like a what's his name, Orson Welles, moment, War of the World. Right. So these flying saucers would crash. We'd open them up. We'd see these bodies on the end and lose. I was going to say a bad word. Lose our minds.
Good save.
And that's what lose our minds. And that's what she said in the book. And controversial. Now it's a very the thing about Annie is I believe I believe she can walk into the CIA, right? I think she's got a hall pass. She can walk into the Pentagon. She's got credibility, and she's very well respected. And she's been to Area 51. She's been there, right? She wrote the book on it. She was able to go to the base and interview and talk and go through all of this. So she has got that kind of access. So what was she told? And told in a manner that convinced her that there was something to this story, and she put it in her book. So, Cristina, I don't know what to make of that. I really don't. I don't buy it, but she did.
What she wrote in her book, Area 51, Uncensored History of America's Top Secret Military Base, it's one that's incredibly controversial and one that makes you think outside of the box. Once again, we simply do not have the answers on what happened in 1947 in Roswell. All we can do is speculate. Did she get information from someone that she could trust? Is it a part of creating more disinformation, creating more confusion? Or is it something else that we're not considering? It's possible. There are so many books about Roswell. There are so many people that have looked into the story. And for the most part, everyone kind of has their own conclusion on what happened, how it was created, so on and so forth. No one really knows. Not everyone's agreeing to the entire story. And I feel that Annie is just adding her little flair to the story as well, because it is one that is so terrible, so grotesque, something that definitely belongs in a horror movie. But should it be one that should be considered? Possibly. Just like
It has to be considered. It does. It does. We cannot in any situation when it comes to certainly UFOs and the Air Force and our government, Washington D.C. and what is really going on here. None of us have. Look, it's very simple. Cristina, have you flown on a flying saucer lately? Have you been to Area 51 lately? Have you witnessed an alien autopsy lately? Well, I don't think so. Have you?
not lately.
Yeah, right. And none of us have. So we need to collect all of the information that we can, pile it up in the middle of the table and see what we've got. A part of that is Annie Jacobson's excellent book. It's an excellent book. And I remember reading that part, and I was like, what, am I reading this right? You read it through it again, and I flipped the page, and I'm reading through it again. I called her on the phone. I said, now, can we talk about this? And she said, I stand by my sources, and this was one of the things that I was told. But here's, she has said this, and I agree with this, and I've often thought about this, that the UFO situation that was going on in the United States and around the world at that time was the perfect smokescreen for hiding some of the other aspects of technology that was going on. With the Soviet Union, we had rocket programs, we had Operation Paperclip. The Soviet Union went in and grabbed every Nazi scientist in the rocket program and the jet engine program and aircraft program that they could, just like we did. And it was a race. It was a race. So the two camps had their developments going on. Russia's trying to get to space. We're trying to get to space. We're trying to develop rockets and jet engines and aircrafts and move all of this technology forward. Where we were on that, we didn't want Russia to know. Russia didn't want us to know. So as long as we were being visited by ET and the public could say that UFOs are in the skies, some of this not all of it, but some of this real technology that was going on was being covered up by newspapers and by the general public. And certainly Joseph Stalin knew that. And he could do the same thing over there with UFO reports and high technology. So with all of this, is it out of the question that Stalin could have taken advantage of the hysteria that was going on here and have some kind of remotely controlled aircraft loaded up with grotesque, creatures created by Joseph Mengele and crash land them in the United States? Put it on the table. Let's leave it right there. It's a possibility.
While you're talking about technology related to this, let's talk about Philip Corso and his book, The Day After Roswell. You simply cannot talk about Roswell without talking about this particular book. And I'm going to share my screen in just a moment, but in that book, it was mentioned that maybe we got a lot of technology to help us advance to where we are today because of that crash. If you haven't read it, I do recommend it. It is a fascinating book. But Jimmy, from your point of view, I know you've read it multiple times,
I do.
and you're dealing with Philip Corso, who is very credible. And I'll tell you his background. He's a retired United States Army lieutenant colonel. So that's a pretty big deal.
Worked in the White House. Worked in the White House.
Right, and
Yep.
he passed away in 1998, I believe. So, but that book that he published was published in 1997. So a year before he passed away. Some people believe that it was a deathbed confession in this book. But Jimmy, I want to hear your thoughts on this.
When that book came out, across the street from my condo in Sherman Oaks was Borders Books, one of the big bookstores. I think it was Borders. And I knew the book was coming out. And so on the day of its release, I walked over to Borders and I walked in. I'm not making this. This is exactly. I walk in. It's a huge 2-floor, beautiful bookstore. Miss those places.
Oh, me too.
And I walk in and they had a display in the middle of the store of The Day After Roswell. And they had like 1,000 books. It was like a Christmas tree thing. And they were all, I was like, well, I guess they've got a copy. So I bought it. And I took that book home. I sat on my couch. I read the entire book the first night. I couldn't put it down.
Wow.
I flipped it over. I started back from the beginning. And there was a lot of interesting aspects to the book that I had personal connections to. And one of them that I could relate to. And one of them where he talks about this technology being distributed and how he got it in the information. We'll come back to that. But he brings up Bell Laboratories. I worked for Bell Laboratories. I worked for Bell Laboratories for 3 years. And you know, so I'm reading, I get to this chapter and, you know, he was doing different aspects of technology and what companies, you know, they went to. But I'm like, Bell Laboratories, the transistor. Now I worked for Bell Labs and I worked for Bell Labs 1981, 82, 83, 84. Okay. One of the things, Bell Labs is proud of a lot of stuff. They were innovators, telephone technology and computers and other things. But one of their inventions that was patented was the transistor. Yeah, it was a Bell Labs invention. And without the transistor, we went from tubes to transistor technology. Tubes to transistor. So everything went from hot molten lava tubes to tiny little transistors, right? So everything shrunk and got a lot faster. And that's what transistors did. It changed the world, and Bell Labs invented that. So I get Corso's book, and he says, nah, it was alien technology that was given to Bell Labs. And and it altered my perception on everything. And so I read the book and read the book and read the book and read the book. The one thing for me that stuck out and still does to this day was 1947. Everything seemed to have happened in 1947. It's a crazy year. I went and I did a Google search. What crazy stuff happened in 1947? You know, and just to see what I would get. 100,000 hits. But and I did. The CIA was created in 1947. The Air Force was created in 1947. The transistor was invented in 1947. On and on, and it just seemed like Roswell happened. And you go and you examine the year 1947, after July, after this crash happened, and you go, well, man, Corso's book, it's kind of accurate. Now, it really discredits, is it just that we didn't have those bright creative minds that we thought were creating Kevlar and night vision and all of these things that circuit boards, optical fibers, everything that he had, listed in the book. Now, well, okay, maybe not fully invented, but you still had to understand the technology and figure out what it was and then develop it. So, no, it's still a crazy amount of ingenuity and smartness on behalf of American engineers and the corporations that developed this material. But the timing of it and the way the Corso's book was written, yeah. There was let me just say this, though. There were some parts of the book that I felt might have been a little embellished. William Burns, who wrote it, Bill Burns, he co-authored it with Colonel Corso. I think he's credited as the writer of the book. But there is a part of the book where Corso says he's at an Air Force base. He's walking by a hangar and he sees somebody there, and he ducks into the hangar and there's a guard, and he goes in, it's empty, and he goes up to one of these crates and he opens up this crate and boop, it's an alien body. And I thought that took away from the book. I did. I don't know. The book didn't need that. So there you go. So he didn't make the connection with alien technology. He said he was given an office at the Pentagon, and they wheeled in a filing cabinet, and he opened up the filing cabinet, the drawer, and this drawer was full of this debris from Roswell, and he was told to take this into the private sector to different companies and have them develop this material, and that's how it was given to him.
And he stated in the book that because of the Roswell crash, people got fiber optics, Kevlar, night vision, and more. So from my understanding, and Jimmy, please correct me if I'm wrong, but was he the only person that mentioned that because of the crash we got advanced technology, or were there other people that made that same conclusion?
Yeah, I think before Corso's book, there were many research, myself included, where we would have to just stop and consider the absolute leap that we took and how quickly it happened after World War II. It was just an amazing amount of everything happened at the same time. And we cannot dismiss a couple of very important things. 1947, 20 years, 1967, we've got men in space. 20 years. And the 20, I'll take it even a step further. 1947. What was the hit song on the radio? Was it the Mills Brothers, right? I don't know, Benny Goodman and whatever, right? 20 years later, Jimi Hendrix. The country in 20 short years, we're in 2023. So it's like talking about 2003 right now, which doesn't that seem like yesterday to you? It does. And it should. It's only 20 years. So in 20 years from 1947 to 1967, we transformed. I mean, everything, even color television, man. It was like that. We went from nothing to something very, very, very quickly. Did it all hinge on Roswell? When you have things like transistors and fiber optics, and I think Kevlar too, as well, and circuit boards and night vision, all of the stuff that just happened. It just seemed like everything that we could think of to advance ourselves was thought of and complete. And it's right there. It's all after 1947. So I think a lot of people were talking about it. Corso did a really good job in his book. He did. He says that he personally, in the book, He talks about how we went to this corporation, how we went to DuPont, how we went to Bell Labs, how we approached them, and how we did it. So the timing of everything would suggest to me that there's a lot of credibility to be put there.
You know what else happened in 1947, Jimmy? Nuclear testing.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to share my screen here. Perfect. And this is something that a lot of people have seen a correlation with UFOs and nuclear testing. We have done a show on that. That was called UFOs and Nukes. We spoke with Robert Salas as well. For those that haven't seen it, I do recommend that you watch that show. But when we're looking at Roswell, this craft came soon after nuclear testing. Is there a correlation there? Is there a connection there? Or is it just merely a coincidence?
No, it's not. It's not. Look, this is where discernment and common sense has to come into play. All right. Yes, 2 weapons were dropped in Japan. Offensive weapons. Tragic. Wish it never happened. It did, but it never happened again. So is it a situation where, and I would think that it makes a lot of sense that we, as a human race, if we were out discovering new planets and worlds, and we found a primitive culture that was on the brink of doing certain, would we be interested in that? Right? Would we be interested if there was a culture out, some species on another planet that was advancing really, really fast, and then suddenly could have technology to end the universe, right? Would we be interested in that? Certainly. And so I believe that we have been visited for thousands, if not millions of years here. And our progress has been watched. And as soon as those bombs were dropped on Japan, that's when the pump the brakes situation happened. And we have not used weapons since then offensively. It's been talked about, not only our country, but other countries around the world. Don't think that Pakistan or India or China or Russia has not thought about dropping bombs on one of their adversaries. Absolutely. It never happened. We came close to doing it in Vietnam. It was talked about, and I'm sure it was talked about after September 11th, right? I mean, there were some pretty angry people, but it never happened. And I think that any opportunity where it was about to happen or could have happened, it was disrupted. It was. And I think that there's a lot of evidence for that. We could always talk about Robert Salas, but that's the case that we know of. That's the public version of it. But I am sure that the same things happened in the Soviet Union, possibly Great Britain, China, and any other country that has got nuclear weapons capabilities, where things have been averted by ET. I'm okay. I'm very confident in saying these things.
And you bring up really great points to help better understand the situation. And it's one that it's another piece of the puzzle that we also need to consider. Brian, thank you so much. It says, like in Star Trek, but it wasn't warp drive that caught the aliens' attention. It was atomic bombs? ? Good point.
I'm just saying, we have to, Cristina, you're very smart. You are very smart, and you ask the right questions, and you're inquisitive. If you put your mind into how we, you and I and everybody in the chat room and our friends and the other humans on this planet, how would we approach that with another species out there that was developing and up and coming? We know the progress that we made here on this planet from, let's just go the last 2,000 years, right? I always say year zero, the day of Jesus, right? So if you go from, the last 2,000 years and how far and how quickly we have come, things can happen where you can go from just like the big technology was fire, right? Fire. That's it. That's the tech and the wheel, and move on to the printing press and domesticating wheat and so forth, to where we are today. It can happen in the blink of an eye. So you would be definitely interested in that. And where are we going to be if we did this in the last 100 years like we have? Where are we going to be in the next 10 years, 20? ET is definitely very, very interested in that. And I think that they would want to know if we're going to be traveling in interstellar space, and maybe we already are we flying around space with nuclear weapons?
Yeah. Are we a threat
Yeah.
to other civilizations? That's a really important question, because we ask those questions when we travel anywhere, have it be here on Earth, or if we're going out and traversing space as well. We ask those questions. What are the threats? Where are the threats? Should we be prepared? Should we shoot first and ask questions later? Or is everything butterflies, flowers, and unicorns, right? Is everything just great?
Yeah, like in my world. But here's the thing, though. Here's the thing. So let's talk about the facts. Let's just talk about the facts of New Mexico and Roswell and nukes. At that time, where we had Los Alamos, we had White Sands, we had Sandia, we had Albuquerque, and the absolute brain trust of the planet is there. Oppenheimer, right? Anybody that you can think of and name are all there.
Right.
All right. Enrico Fermi, right? That's it. That's where they hung out. And while all of that was going on, Roswell happens. And while Roswell happens, there were green, as described by the scientists of that were living in the area of Albuquerque, there were green glowing crafts that were sighted in the skies constantly. And it freaked them out so much. This was a major, major conversation, not only with the military, but with the scientists that were there. And it wasn't just the nuclear side, which was a big focus, but it was everything else in technology. It was rockets and guidance systems and communications that they had to install on U.S. soil. 3 radar stations in that section of New Mexico so they could triangulate these sightings of these objects that were coming in over their testing facilities and their laboratories. So is that ET? I would strongly suggest yes. I sound like Robert Clotworthy on Ancient Aliens. But yeah, I would say that's an indication of what was going on. They didn't know. The brightest minds out there didn't know what was happening in the skies over White Sands, over Sandia, over Los Alamos, all the way down to Roswell. So they installed. Here's the thing. Why am I so adamant about this? I'm not talking about radar in Alaska, radar in Canada, looking for Russian missiles to come over the horizon, or radar installations on the coast of the United States, right? Because we were in a war footing coming off of World War II. We're talking about radar installations in the middle of the country for objects that we couldn't identify, that were over our most sensitive installations during the time of Roswell in the incident in 1947. So yes, ET knows where the nuclear activity is. You can measure it. You can see it. You can understand it. You can pinpoint it. And that's where it was happening. That's where these probes, if you want to call them that, were monitoring the progress of what was going on in New Mexico at that time. So is there a connection? There's a direct connection between Roswell and nukes and New Mexico.
Brian says maybe they took the wrong turn in Albuquerque.
Possible.
Thank you, Brian.
Possible.
We don't know.
Hey,
but...
can I this is your show, Cristina, and I've took it over completely.
Oh, but I enjoy hearing what you have to say when it comes to Roswell.
Well, here's the thing. I know somebody did a quote the other day. They said, Jimmy says, so here's the thing. And they put it in, make a t-shirt. So here's the thing, Cristina. So here's the thing. It is so important to stress that with everything else that is going on and the interference that is happening and the possibility of this happening in New Mexico, we want to step back and say, well, wait a minute. How can a craft travel through the distances of the universe and make it all the way here and crash? I step back and I go, wait a minute. Has the world just become dumb? Right? Has the internet just collected a bunch of dumbness and we're all just gathered here now? Think about what you just said. Everything that we do, everything crashes. Everything. We crash cars. We crash planes. We sink ships. Every single thing that we have shot at the moon has crashed. Right? Everything that we have shot at Mars has crashed. Everything that we have shot at Venus has crashed. Cassini just crashed into Saturn. Right? Now, you don't fully understand the atmosphere or anything that is going on with a foreign body that is out there. We still don't understand the atmosphere of Venus. We don't. The other day, it was released that NASA is now researching batteries that can keep a probe powered in Venus long enough to get some measurements done before it crashes into the surface. That's nice. What they're trying to do right now. The key word here is crash. So when we get to the Martian atmosphere, we've tried to figure out different ways to get stuff on the ground and to land, right? And one of the things that we do is we just crash into it and let stuff bounce around. Now, I'm not suggesting that's what ET does, but what I am saying is you fly across the universe and you get here, and the craft that you have that flies great on your planet, flies great in space, gets to our atmosphere, and it may have issues. It just might have some issues, and it might get struck by lightning. It might run into a tornado. It could do a lot of different things, but to suggest that they should be able to fly here and not have any problems at all, that is just dumb. It's just a dumb thing to say when that's all we do is crash stuff, right? Until we figure out how to get it right. So it's that simple. Could they fly across the vast span and get here and get through our atmosphere and go, whoa, 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 whoa? Yeah, I think it's entirely possible. So yeah, absolutely.
John Aside, thank you so much. It says hashtag Ramen Wagon. Another great show, Cristina and Jimmy. Thank you so much, John Aside. And Cassidy as well. Thank you. So, Jimmy, you brought up crashes, and it seems possibly, just maybe, there might not have been one crash in Roswell in 1947, but there might have been multiple crashes.
3. Yeah, 3, maybe more.
So yeah. I'm going to share my screen here. Because this is a topic that you're very knowledgeable in. Like, you know what you're talking about. So I would like to hear your points before I bring over mine.
There, one of the books that I had read early on about Roswell pointed out there was a geological survey team from a university, I think it was Pennsylvania, is out in the desert, and there was a lot of different things going on out there. There was the search for oil. There was rocks and the geology and things. So there was a team out there, and then there was another guy that was just out hanging out. His name is Brazel, and he sees this archaeological, some type of scientific group, and they're out there. So he makes a note, and they're wandering through, and they come up over a hill, and what do they find? a flying saucer crashed into the side of the hill. And they go down and discover a bunch of bodies lying outside of this craft. It was big too, by the way. It was hundreds of feet in diameter. And so this account makes its way into a book in 1950. Now, this isn't Roswell, okay, but this was a separate book talking about another crash retrieval. Again, is it the crash at Corona? Is it Aztec? Are we talking about the same thing? So that was in 1950. He comes out and talks about this many, many years later. And there were a group of investigators, of researchers, that went to see if there was any universities that had teams of people out there in New Mexico at that time, eastern New Mexico, northeastern New Mexico. And it turns out that there was. Now, did it match up with the dates? There a little bit of confusion. Is it just a coincidence that this happened? Bramall himself ended up kind of blowing his side of the story with the dates. Like, he wasn't actually in New Mexico at that time. Did he make it up? But what it did do is cause a lot of research to go in to see if this part was accurate. So here's the situation with that. If we go back to, was it a separate crash? Was it the craft that skipped off the ground in Roswell, continued flying east over New Mexico, and then crash in Corona or Aztec? Was it just the same craft? Was it a different craft? Were they flying in a group and they all decided to crash? Were they shot down? There was missile testing that was going on. All of these things come into play. But what it did do, Cristina, is it took the alien body count from 2 to apparently 8. That was the first thing. The second part about this was that there were Jesse Marcel never mentioned bodies at the Roswell crash site. No, there was never any mentions of that. There was the debris. The gouge that was identified in the ground, Marcel didn't see that at first. This is a large area. It's covering hundreds of acres. That day, they did a flyover. They took an aircraft from Roswell Army Airfield, and a major flew over the site, and that's when he saw the gouge and the direction of it and where it was going. They were also able to get a pretty good grip on the debris field and how big it was. So Marcel didn't see that, and Marcel, the gouge, and he never did identify any alien bodies. The alien bodies came from Glenn Dennis and other witnesses, but that all happened at the Army hospital at the air base, and that these bodies came from the second crash site, not the impact site, but the crash site that happened north and west of the Foster Ranch.
And in 2012, an exclusive interview by retired Air Force Lieutenant Colonel Richard French told the Huffington Post that he had been aware of 2 crashes during that time. And he stated there were actually 2 crashes at Roswell, which most people don't know. He then continued, the first one was shot down by an experimental U.S. airplane that was flying out of White Sands, New Mexico, and it shot what was effectively an electronic pulse type weapon that disabled and took away all controls of the UFO, and that's why it crashed. There's a little bit more to that, but he continued with, when they hit it with the electromagnetic pulse, bingo, there goes all of their electronics, and consequently, the UFO was uncontrollable. Now, he stated this in the Huffington Post back in 2012, and there's a few questions that I have. One, how come his comrades didn't corroborate that story? Why did he take so long to come out to tell his story? Why did he tell Huffington Post specifically? And even more so, we have heard time and time again, us researchers here in the UFO field have seen where UFOs are able to control our technology, our pilots' radars, even to present day. How was it that back in 1947, they were able to do the opposite, control and take over these UFOs instead of vice versa?
Correct.
So this is something that I was like, I need to ask Jimmy about this because this information is public, but then it leads into, is it true? Is it disinformation?
Right.
What's going on here?
If we just strip all of this away to the basics as I laid out in the beginning, which is Walter Haut, Jesse Marcel, Mac Brazel, and the events of that particular day, combined with the storm and everything else. That's, I think, and the press release and the Roswell Daily Record. Just leave all of that sit right there. What has transpired since 1979 with Stanton Friedman and Jesse Marcel coming forward since then has created opportunity. It's created opportunity. There's a lot of money. You have Hollywood, you have film, television, book deals, and people that just want to have their name in print and maybe become a little bit of a little bit of fame and things, where this opportunity is there now to make up your own story and get in on the action. So it has there are some elements to truth to some of these things, but look at the alien autopsy film and what that did in 1995, and it crushed me. It crushed my spirit. It crushed my soul. I was so bummed about that. And not only that, I paid for that videotape, but it was just that it was purported to be this real thing, and the hysteria that was around that, and live Fox television and everything that was around that, and it just turned out to be bogus. It was, it's opportunist, that come out. Now, Ray Santilli probably made $100 million on that. And I'm not saying that every book that comes out makes a ton of money, but opportunists will come out and bring their own version of some fabrication to this. And what is real and what isn't. We have to go in and again use the big D in discernment to try to figure out the facts and what is true and what is not. I will continually go back to the excellent work of Stanton Friedman and everybody else originally, and that core group of when the witnesses to Roswell are all dead today, right? So now everything that we have a son or a daughter that are old too. So now it's grandchildren, and we're getting into second, third, and fourth hand accounts from the eyewitnesses. So we have to go back and we have to take a look at 1947, who was there, what happened, who said what, and then jump to 1979 and Jesse Marcel, who was there. I mean, that's a fact. And that group that was around him. Everything else after that, it's, if somebody's going to come forward, I keep going back to the original facts of the case, and that's where I stay.
I'm with you on that one. Jimmy, thank you so much for giving us all of your insights when it comes to Roswell that took place in 1947. Who's on the show today on Fade to Black?
Randall Carlson, the beard of knowledge. I know, right? Right. Somebody pinch me. I got Randall Carlson on tonight. I get to hang out with Randall. I'm going to say this about Randall really quick. So he's on my show, right? Into the Vortex. Fly him out. I've done many, many shows with Randall and so many hours long conversations on the phone. We just have a lot of fun with each other. But anyway, I was able to have breakfast with him a couple of days, had a dinner with him, and just hung out. And he is frighteningly smart. And all he wants to do is share his head. That's all he wants to do. Just ask him a question and just let him go. He loves doing that. And that's what we're going to do tonight on Faded Black. I'm telling you, it's one of the funnest things to do is to hang out with Randall Carlson. So tonight, I've got the beard of knowledge.
Rock on. Thank you so much, Jimmy.
You guys behave. I'll see you tonight.
Bye. What an awesome show today. It took us a while, but we got there. We finally covered Roswell. And there were still so many bits and pieces and details that we simply did not have time to cover. It's one of the biggest and most famous UFO stories of all time. Tomorrow is Weekly Strange News at 3 p.m. PST. And if you watch the show live, you'll be able to join the prize draw for a Starbucks or Amazon gift card. Last week, the winner was Paul Zinder, and he was in the live chat just a little while ago. And the week prior was Applejacks971. So if you want to win a Starbucks or Amazon gift card, make sure to watch the show live tomorrow at 3 p.m. PST. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't already, and hit the notification bell on YouTube. Click set for all notifications so that you do not miss tomorrow's show, where I'll be covering all the strange news and mysterious headlines from around the world. If you enjoyed this conversation, bring it over to the Discord server. That link is below, where you can talk to 1,400 other like-minded members. And there's a bunch of different rooms where you can chat to other people with. It's open 24/7, and it is a friendly and secure place to share your thoughts, insights, stories, experiences, and more. That link is also right here on the screen. That is it for today. I will see you tomorrow. Be safe, and remember, keep your eyes on the skies.